Another topic, if we want to kind of transition loosely, I guess, because seed oils likely, quote unquote, cause this, is leaky gut.
Oh, goodness. Yes. Leaky gut is one of these diagnoses du jour that I'm just going to, it'll be controversial, but it's not a medical condition. Now, leaky gut in the context of physiology is a term that colloquially is used for intestinal cell permeability. Now, what happens with a lot of these pseudoscience diagnoses, leaky gut, adrenal fatigue, a lot of these other ones is, the people who want to promote it take a term that does have some sort of scientifically related definition, and then they kind of manipulate it and co-opt it. So leaky gut basically suggests that your gastrointestinal tract is leaky, literally holes are forming, and bacteria and toxins are always involved in all of these things. The seed oils are toxic and the toxins are leaking in, and the brain toxic. Anyway, so these things leak through your intestinal wall and get into your bloodstream. It's very popular among your naturopaths and your alternative practitioners, and they say that it causes all sorts of symptoms from bloating and gas and constipation and diarrhea to food sensitivities, which are not a thing either. I would love to talk about that too. I have many times, but it also suppresses your immune system. It causes brain fog and memory loss and fatigue and skin issues and ADHD and depression and anxiety and autoimmune disorders and sugar cravings and also autism I saw recently. So this is not a thing, but basically when you digest food, when it gets into your GI tract, you've got 4,000 square feet of surface area in your different systems. First, food enters the stomach. Your stomach acid and various enzymes start to break it down. It moves into the small intestine, and then you have more enzymes. The walls of the small intestine are absorbing water and nutrients through channels, proteins, things like that transport those nutrients into the bloodstream. And then you have the transport of those that partially digested food about 8 hours later go into the large intestine, your colon, right? And it's going to hang out there for like a day and a half, sometimes 2 days, and it's turning the food waste, the indigestible stuff, into stool, absorbing lots more water and all of that. Simultaneously, you have your gut microbiome, trillions and trillions of microorganisms that are actually helping us digest the food and extract nutrients, and it's also feeding them so they can survive. And those microorganisms are really important for a lot of things. They're also used as kind of a weapon where people make fake claims about the microbiome when we don't fully understand the scope of it, but that's a whole other topic. But basically, you've got these layers of your intestine. You've got the mucosa layer, you've got the submucosa, you've got the muscular layer, and you've got the adventitia. And so the mucosa is kind of the interface between your intestine and the food, and these are epithelial cells, skin cells that secrete mucus, which protects the cells. And the mucosa is absorbing nutrients, and it helps transport nutrients, and it also protects the barriers from being broken and those microorganisms from getting in and causing infection. But it's like convoluted, right? It's got these finger-like projections, and it's got all this surface area. It's kind of like a roller coaster, and you have a whole bunch of stuff going on in there. And you have all these cells that are touching each other, but they're dynamic, right? They're moving around, and they're opening little ports to transport nutrients in. So technically, yeah, your gut is leaky because you have to move things in and out. You got to move molecules of water in. You got to move nutrients out. You got to move cells around. Everything's kind of dynamic. So they take this concept of the fact that your intestine is dynamic because it's really complex. And then they say that those junctions between the cells are just, they're loose, and there's gaps and there's cracks and there's holes. And then all these undigested food particles are just seeping in there. That wouldn't happen, because if that happened, you would develop a blood infection and it would lead to sepsis, and you would be at risk of dying. So again, this is not a medical condition. There are gastrointestinal disorders that are that have issues with perturbing the cells or leading to inflammatory processes like celiac disease and Crohn's disease. But the general population is not experiencing leaky gut syndrome and causing all of these very generic, non-specific symptoms. And the problem is that there's all of these fraudulent tests that people use to diagnose leaky gut, like the mannitol or lactulose urine test. And these are not reliable. But unfortunately, they've been popularized and they're used as kind of credibility for this, this diagnosis. And so, of course, the treatments usually involve very restrictive and fad diets because you have to cure the leaks in your gut. There's a lot of supplements that are recommended. And I just want to reiterate that there's no medical or scientific basis for them. And supplements are not regulated, and many could actually be harmful for you. But yeah, so it's kind of the same old story where a legitimate scientific phenomenon in the context of how cells are dynamic and function has kind of been manipulated to suggest that you have these like huge crevices in your intestinal tract that's leaking things out into your bloodstream and causing all of these, really nonspecific symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The one thing you mentioned that I want to follow up on is just like a food sensitivity or lack thereof, perhaps. What is going on when people like minus someone with actual celiac disease or Crohn's disease where, you actually know what's happening with that particular individual. Like you said, that's not a population level problem. That's an individual problem. Mm-hmm. If I go or like, I think most people I talk to, myself included, there are certain foods where if I eat them, I get a stomach ache from them. Is that just something that's
sure?
It's just everyone is going to have some foods that just don't jive well for them for whatever reason. We don't really know. Is that potentially, I know the microbiome thing is very early still, and we don't really have definitive answers with that either. Could it be something where just like you need to reintroduce that food in gradual amounts and try to build up a tolerance to it? Or what's kind of going on in those situations, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to like foods not agreeing with people, there's really two main buckets. There's food allergies and there's food intolerances. So food allergies are an immune system mediated process where essentially a substance in that food is recognized by our immune system as a foreign invader. And our immune system, specifically the mast cell arm, launches this really, really rapid inflammatory process mediated by the secretion of particular types of antibodies called IgE and histamine. And it creates this, and it can lead to this anaphylaxis reaction. So food allergies, I think a lot of people think of in the context of peanut allergies. Celiac is actually a wheat allergy, so it's an allergic reaction against a protein found in wheat. So those are a very specific reactions against specific molecules that's mediated by your immune system. And so gluten is often vilified in the context of celiac disease. And a lot of people are like, well, I have a gluten sensitivity. And that's become very popular, right? So if you don't have celiac, which is the illness for the allergy against the protein found in wheat and barley and rye, which is gluten, there's not evidence that there's some kind of nebulous gluten sensitivity. So if you don't have celiac or a wheat allergy, you don't need to be avoiding gluten. The other side of the arm would be intolerances. And so intolerances are not related to the immune system, but are rather related to digestion. And so I like to use lactose intolerance as an example. So lactose intolerance is essentially your body does not make the enzyme required to digest that particular sugar. So lactose is a sugar that's found in dairy products, and we produce an enzyme called lactase. So if it ends in ASE, it's an enzyme, it breaks things down. So people who don't make that enzyme or don't make enough of that enzyme might struggle to digest the sugars found in dairy products that contain lactose or products that contain lactose broadly. And as a result, they might have gastrointestinal symptoms. So bloating and cramping and diarrhea and things like that. So two different kind of biological processes, but related to reactions to things you eat. So it's possible that people may have intolerances for things that they eat, and that's why they get a stomach upset or things like that. It's also possible that they're getting stomach upset because you're feeding a certain population of microorganisms and they're creating a lot of gas as a result, because when they metabolize, they're producing gas, and that gas is going into your digestive tract, and it either is going up or it's going down. And so that could be something too. But what happens again, and there's a lot of other things that can cause stomach issues, right? There's a ton of nerves that innervate your GI tract. We know anxiety and stress and all sorts of other things can play a role in that too. So it's really hard to tease it out. So what has happened is that there's these companies, one in particular called Everlywell, which is kind of the biggest perpetrator of this. They sell these sensitivity tests where basically you do like a skin prick and you give a blood sample and they look for all these things that you're, in food that you're supposedly sensitive to. What they're testing for is an antibody called IgG. And IgG antibodies are produced anytime you encounter anything. So your body, your immune system produces IgG against pretty much everything in your life. It does not indicate you're sensitive to anything. It's actually an antibody that's produced as tolerance, meaning, hey, I saw it. It's not foreign. I just have those antibodies, so I know that next time I encounter it, I don't need to sound the alarm. And the levels quite often can correlate with how recently you were exposed to it. So if you test positive for eggs on a food sensitivity test, it does not mean that you were sensitive to eggs. It means you ate eggs recently, probably. But the problem is that then leads to misinformation, disordered eating, restrictive diets, because these people, it's this card, right? And it gives you like 20 different things that you're sensitive to. And all these people are like, oh my gosh, I need to eliminate all of these things from my diet. And it becomes psychological, and it becomes, part of this identity. And it also runs the risk of malnourishment, because now you're avoiding these entire food groups when there's actually no science behind it. So, generally speaking, if you eat something and it makes your stomach upset, don't eat it, right? If you're legitimately concerned that you may have a true digestive issue, like an intolerance, see a gastroenterologist. Or if you're concerned that you might have an allergy, see an immunologist, but don't do an at-home consumer test for food sensitivity, because that's not founded on reality.
I remember like when those first started getting popular, I heard some people talking about it and they were just like, well, I took the test and I got these results, and it was like, there's a bunch of foods on here that I eat all the time and feel great with, and a bunch that they said I should be eating. When I do eat them, they give me a stomach ache. I was like, so it's kind of like a coin flip as to whether it would be something reasonable or not.
Yeah. And aside from the fact that IgG is not an indication of whether or not, you sensitivity is not a medical term to begin with, but anyway, IgG antibodies don't indicate anything. These are consumer tests, right? They're a commercial company. There's no lab validation. There's no standardization. Like, who knows what they're actually reporting, right? And again, it's predatory, and I think it just does harm to people's health, but also just like literacy, scientific literacy in general.